In South Korea, the high unemployment rate is still a serious social problem. Furthermore, some experts say that machines will replace a number of human jobs in near future. However, I do not totally agree with that view. I don't want to deprive humans with their jobs. I would like to help and talk to people. Our next speaker will give us some expert advice and help us find a solution regarding employment issues. Let me introduce our next special guest, Fishman Cohen, who serves as CEO of iRelaunch. She has in-depth knowledge and experiences especially on Returnship, an internship program for experienced people who have been out of the labor force for some time. As a woman who returned to work at Bain Capital after 11 years out of the full-time workforce, Ms. Fishman Cohen runs the Returnship program to help employees on career break return to work. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Fishman Cohen.
Thank you. I've never been introduced by a robot before. Very exciting. Thanks for introducing me. Yes, I'm Fishman Cohen, and I'm speaking today about something called Returnships. Some of you might have heard of this, some of you may not. They're mid-career internship programs for people who are returning to work after a career break. And let me just talk a little bit about the agenda, what I'm going to cover in this brief 30 minutes. First, I want to talk about what is happening in the United States in terms of how companies are engaging with women who are returning to work after taking career breaks. The biggest group are women who are taking career breaks for childcare reasons, and that's the population that I want to talk about today that I think is going to be relevant to Korea and has already been talked about in terms of being a source of additional labor, looking in the face of labor shortages going forward. I also want to talk about why this is happening, why these returnship programs are being used, who these women are, give you a sense about some of them, and which companies are offering the programs. And I want to redefine the concept of internship. Not only because I know that a lot of people associate an internship with something that a college student might do in the summer, something that's more entry level, and also from my conversations here with individuals and employers, there is an association with internships that it's menial tasks like making copies or bringing coffee in. And that's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about mid-career internships with substantive roles that then lead to people being hired at mid to senior levels. So I'll give you some more examples of that in just a minute. I also want to say why I don't usually call them quote, returnships, and I'll just tell you now. So Goldman Sachs started the very first program in the United States for return to work internships, and they call their program Returnship, and it's trademarked as their program name. And so now, generically, these mid-career internships are starting to be known as returnships, but I prefer to call them reentry internships or returning professional internships. But today, I will call them returnships for simplicity. And then the other thing I want to talk about is why are these programs proliferating in the United States and also in the UK and India? What are the results that we're seeing for them from these programs, and why are companies so interested in starting them and growing them? And finally, what's relevant about this for Korea and where we are now in Korea in terms of the relationship between employers and people who are returning to work, and what the views are of that population and how they potentially could be changing. So we're really talking about a transition, and it's a transition going from this. This is me when I was on my career break. I'll tell you about that in a minute, in my minivan driving around, and then transitioning back to the professional self. So reconnecting with your professional self, and what does it mean to be going through that transition? This is my family now. I have 4 children. They're all grown. They're ages 22 through 27. But this is really personal for me because I myself took an 11-year career break, as my introductory robot told you all. And so my kids, though, were much younger when I went back. They were ages 5 through 11. So let me just take you back very quickly to 1985. This is me graduating from Harvard Business School. I worked first in manufacturing, and then I switched over into a finance role and ended up working in corporate finance for the investment bank Drexel Burnham Lambert. And those of you who are old enough to remember Drexel, it was a bank that kind of defined the 1980s finance. So here are a couple of photographs of me when I was there with my big glasses that I think now are coming back in style. And also, you hear about those big shoulder pads that people used to wear in the late 80s that looked like football players. This is what we were talking about, this kind of an outfit. So I was working at Drexel in the late 80s, and I then went on maternity leave with this baby, where there I am, pregnant with that first child. I went on maternity leave at the end of 1989, and in February of 1990, Drexel collapsed, and it was quite sudden and spectacular in a way, and it had repercussions for the United States savings and loan industry, certain areas of the economy. But for me personally, it meant I was not returning to work there because there was no company to return to. So that began my career break. I did some project work for the next 5 years while I was having 3 more children, and all of a sudden, this happened. So I have 4 kids. I find myself, when my 4th child was born, I left the paid workforce entirely. I began a 6-year period at home with my kids, and this is in year 9 of my total of 11 years out of the full-time workforce. The 5 when I was doing the project work, plus the 6 when I was completely out of the paid workforce. I took an 11-year career break. Around year 9, which is around the time of this picture, my kids were ages 3 through 9, and I remember having a moment thinking, and this was back in 1999, before there were any programs, before there were any academic or employer programs, there was no media coverage. No one was talking about this. I did not know a single other person who had gone back to work after taking a career break. But I remember I became president of the Parent-Teacher Association at my kids' school, and I thought, when that 2-year term is over, I'm going back to work. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going back. And I ended up going back in 2001 to Bain Capital, the investment firm, and in part because there were ex-Drexel people who were working there who remembered me when we used to work together years before. This return to work was written up in a Harvard Business School case study. You can still buy it and read the details if you're interested, but that was about my return to work. And I made all sorts of mistakes and learned a lot from it. And shortly after I left, I stayed at Bain Capital for about a year, and then I left and got a contract to write a book with Vivian Rabin, who is a mother of 5 who took a 7-year career break. And we wrote this book, Back on the Career Track, which came out in 2007. And you can see we've had a number of editions and translations, including a translation into Korean, which is still available today. In 2007, we also started iRelaunch. And iRelaunch is our company where we focus on 4 constituencies: individuals who are returning to work after taking career breaks, employers who are looking to engage with this population, a national network of alumni career services directors who are interested in seeing their alumni return to work who are on career break, and professional organizations. I'll give you an example of an initiative we're working on with a professional organization that's in a very specific industry sector and a group of companies. I'll talk to you about that shortly. But why are companies so interested in this population? Why are we so great? We call ourselves, the group of people who are returning after a career break, relaunchers. And the reason our talent pool is great are several-fold. First of all, think about our life stage. So for those of us who took career breaks for reasons that have to do with childcare, when we are done with that career break, we are unlikely to take another maternity leave. So we have fewer or no maternity leaves going forward. We have a more stable life stage, fewer spousal or partner job relocations. We're in we have great work experience. We have a more mature perspective. We're not trying to find ourselves like we might have been when we were much younger. And we have an energy and enthusiasm about returning to work precisely because we've been away from it for a while. And I can tell you myself, when I was in that year 9 of my 11-year career break, I had what we call a chomping at the bit enthusiasm. I couldn't wait to get back to work, even though I had no idea how I was going to make it happen. Now, on the flip side, employers have concerns about relaunchers. And one of them is that they're worried we are technologically obsolete. So having been technologically obsolete myself at one point, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, which I'll show you in a minute, but because I had done financial analysis in the late 80s, I was using Lotus 123 in order to do that analysis, and then I had to learn how to do it on Excel, which it actually wasn't that hard. I just learned how to do it in Excel. And we see now, and we encourage relaunchers to do this updating so they have knowledge of basic office management software. And now we work with technical relaunchers, people in IT and engineering who were returning to highly technical careers after years away. And I'll give you examples of how people, not by exception anymore, many examples of how technical relaunchers have updated their skills either through in-person courses, certificate programs. They might take one of those MOOCs. I don't know if people are familiar, through edX or Coursera, the free university courses you can take in a particular programming language, for example. We've seen all of that kind of updating go on and then have these relaunchers be thriving in their new roles. The other issue where employers are concerned is that they're worried that relaunchers don't know what they want to do. And we tell the relaunchers that it's their job to figure out how their interests and skills have changed or have not changed while they have been on career break and where they can add the most value. And when they're in an interview, we tell the employers, ask the relauncher if they've done any kind of a career assessment. And then we tell the relaunchers, you should have a good answer for this question. And in fact, you can make the answer to this question work to your advantage. If the employer says, wow, why did you even apply for this job? And the person can say, I did not apply for this job on a whim. I applied for this job after a lot of thought about where I could add the most value, and here is why I feel I'm the most qualified. So we feel that relaunchers have to do the hard work to figure out exactly what they want to do, but after they've done that, then they're in a position to really contribute to the employer. So at iRelaunch, we've been tracking career reentry programs of all kinds since 2008. And in 2010, we started noticing the use of internships or internship-like experiences. And I want to tell you that I'm just using the word internship as a catch-all term. It really means any kind of short-term assignment. It can be a contract consulting role. It can be a special project. It can be temp work. But we call it an internship as sort of a one-word description of these short-term arrangements. So we started noticing in 2010 the use of internship experiences. There were a couple of corporate programs using internships to engage with returning mid-career professionals. There were a couple of academic programs. We saw an example in the military. So we started tracking this more seriously for a couple of years, wrote a report about it that became this article in Harvard Business Review called The 40-Year-Old Intern. I have to give them credit for that title. The editors there thought of that. But this article came out 5 years ago in 2012. It's regarded as the seminal article on the topic of mid-career internships. And then 2 years ago, November of 2015, I gave a local TED Talk in Boston on this topic of how to return to work after a career break. And it was one of 4% of the TED Talks that were done locally that were elevated to the Big TED platform. And then it has since amassed over 1.5 million views, and it's been translated into 29 languages, including Korean. And when you do a TED Talk, you're supposed to have a big idea. So I had two ideas. One of them was that companies, big companies that had large internship programs for university students should consider running a similarly large internship program for mid-career professionals, that those two types of programs should run side by side. And there were a lot of commonalities between those two programs that companies could use to create the mid-career internship program. And the other big idea is once companies got comfortable with the idea of using an internship-like experience to engage with returning professionals, they could then use internships to engage with a whole range of non-traditional candidates, whether it's veterans transitioning to civilian roles, whether it's retirees coming out of retirement, whether it's expats repatriating. All these non-traditional populations could be either in the same program altogether or in separate programs for each one of them. And we're actually starting to see this happen. Now, why are internships such a perfect vehicle to engage with the return to work population? It's precisely because if employers attach risk to hiring someone coming off of a career break, so if they think it's risky to hire from this population, the internship lowers that perceived risk because it allows the company to evaluate the mid-career intern based on an actual work sample instead of a series of interviews, and the company does not have to make that hiring decision until the internship period is over. So it's perfectly positioned for companies that are curious about this population. They've heard it's high caliber, but they're a little afraid to just step in and hire people returning after long career breaks directly into full-time roles. I'm going to give you just some very quick examples of which companies are running programs so you actually see what they look like and who's running them and what they're called. So let me just run through a few. So this is the Goldman Sachs Returnship program that started in 2008. JP Morgan started their Reentry program in 2013. And then in 2014, Credit Suisse started Real Returns. Morgan Stanley started Return to Work, and also MetLife started their Act 2 program. And then in just the last year, Barclays has started their Encore program in the UK and the US. Macquarie is, right as we speak, has applications open for their first program in the United States. Moody's has their Reignite program. They're running their for the second year in a row. And so you can see there's a lot of activity on Wall Street and in financial services. And that is because there is a sense of urgency among employers in the financial services industry that they don't have enough women in mid to senior level roles. So they start maybe 50-50 male-female when everyone's starting entry level, and then as time goes by, the women leave, in part because some of them leave to be home with their families. They leave for a whole range of reasons, but the reality is by the time people are at mid-level, there are not as many women anymore. So there was a sense of urgency around how do we engage with mid to senior level women, and that's when these programs started. And then once they started, then the companies saw who was coming in the door. These programs are really competitive now. Hundreds of people, sometimes even in the thousands, could apply for maybe 25 spots in a particular cohort or a particular class at one point or another. And so all of a sudden, they're getting these really high caliber people in, and then other managers are saying, I want to be part of that program too, so they start to expand. That's why we've seen a lot of activity on Wall Street, because the sense of urgency about women was the most acute on Wall Street at the earliest point. Here are some examples of who is in these programs. And you can see, I want to point out a few things. First of all, take a look at how long their career breaks are. I don't know if you can see in the back of the room, but I'll read it to you. The career breaks range from 4 years to 13 years. And the other thing I want you to notice is what level people are being hired into. So these programs these examples are people who went through the internship program, were successful, and then were hired. And so you can see 3 of them were hired as vice presidents one in the general counsel office and a couple in the wealth management, asset management group. One was hired as an associate in corporate treasury. But the idea is that these are not menial tasks. And when I've spoken to Korean women, very accomplished, educated, experienced Korean women who are having a hard time getting back into the workforce, they tell me that they feel the only thing that's open to them is like being a cashier at a retail store, when they have a tremendous experience and they're very high caliber themselves. So I just want to show these examples that people are coming back after multi-year career breaks into these substantive roles. The other thing I want to talk about is what's happening in tech. So one of the most important initiatives that we work on at iRelaunch is that we do a joint initiative with the Society of Women Engineers, which is the largest member-based professional organization in the world. They have 35,000 individual members, and they have an 80-company corporate partnership council, and those companies meet in person with the Society of Women Engineers 3 times a year. So it's quite a large organization, and we started with them the STEM Reentry Task Force to engage with companies who were willing to commit to pilot a career reentry internship program for returning technical professionals. And here's who's involved. You can see some of the biggest, most prestigious companies in the world. The first year is the top half of the screen. IBM, General Motors, Cummins, Intel, Booz Allen Hamilton, Johnson Controls, and Caterpillar were the inaugural members. And then it was so successful, we ran it again. We had so much interest that we brought on again. You can see Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, Ford, Northrop Grumman, United Technologies, Johnson & Johnson. So really some of the brand name companies. And those programs might start in the US, but now they're expanding domestically, they're expanding across business lines, they're expanding internationally. So one of the reasons that we want to work with the biggest companies in the world is this potential to scale. And we are continuing to run the task force, and we'll be making some more announcements about who else is going to be involved soon. And the Society of Women Engineers has a huge annual conference every year. In fact, the next one is next week. I'm going to be in Austin, Texas. There'll be over 12,000 people there, and we're going to have some showcase panels on the STEM Reentry Task Force. And let me just show you a few of the tech programs so you see what they look like. This is the IBM Tech Reentry Program. This is me with one of our coaches, and we do manager training and recruiter training. Here we're doing internship orientation for the interns in one of the IBM Tech Reentry cohorts. These women are all data scientists, and 100% of them were hired after the program was over. A really successful initiative for IBM. This is United Technologies. Their Re-Empower program just started. It's going to launch in 10 different locations and maybe more. Their applications are open right now. General Motors Take 2. So an example of expansion. In the first year, General Motors ran their initial program in Detroit for automotive engineering. And then the second time they ran it in the same year, just a few months later, they included their IT group in Austin, Texas. And then they ran it a third time in the same year and included their finance group in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's what we mean by seeing these programs expand over time. The Cummins, the industrial equipment manufacturer, has their Repower program. Ford has Reentry. Northrop Grumman has iReturn. And Johnson & Johnson has Reignite. It just so happens Johnson & Johnson and Moody's both have the same name for their program. We've seen that a couple times. Oh, yes, and Booz Allen Hamilton is going to run Return to Work for a second time this year. Now, here's examples of technical professionals who are returned after long career breaks. Again, notice how long their career breaks are. Anywhere from 5 to 20 years. You can see the second from the right, that woman, Susan Gray, she worked at General Motors over 20 years ago and took a 20-year career break and then came back as a brake electronics engineer where she is now. The woman in the middle, Rushi, she was a data scientist who was brought into a data analyst role after completing the IBM Tech Reentry program. She took a Python course on edX as part of her updating, and that was viewed as significant background to qualify her to be part of the program. These women are thriving in their roles. And in fact, every year we run our iRelaunch Return to Work conference on the East Coast at Columbia University. On the West Coast, we run it at Stanford. And last May, when we ran it at Stanford, we had a woman who had taken a 22-year career break and was working for NBC Digital as an iOS developer, had been back for 2.5 years already, thriving in the role. So we have lots and lots of these examples. It's not just one person here or there. And one of the things that we do at iRelaunch is we document these return to work stories, and we have about 300 of them on our website, in part to inspire individuals, but also to show employers success story after success story of how people are brought back in. And the other thing I want to emphasize here is not only the length of the career breaks, but again, look at the roles that they're coming into. This is not menial labor. This is mid to senior level substantive professional roles that people are taking after these internship programs are complete. So just a few stats for you. The financial services programs, we're seeing 50% to over 90% of the people in each cohort. They're brought together in groups, and they all start on the same day, just like a university internship. 50% to over 90% of them are getting hired after they finish the program. The STEM Reentry Task Force, 60% to 100% we're seeing getting hired depending on the program and the particular cohort. And when we were looking at the STEM Reentry Task Force numbers, a lot of them were skewing to the high end of the range. So we took a weighted average, and it's 89% of the inaugural, the first 100 or so interns who were part of these programs were getting hired. So we're really excited about those results. We'll have about 200 interns who have gone through the STEM Reentry Task Force programs by the end of this year. It's the largest multi-company career reentry initiative in the country, and we think probably beyond. The programs range from 9 weeks to 6 months, depending on the company. Each company establishes the program that's the right program for them. They establish their unique length, what time of year they're offering it, how many times a year they're offering it, where their positions are, what areas of the company. Everything about the program is unique to each company, and that's part of our model, because the biggest companies want to have their own program programs that are highly customized and not be part of a generic program that has to be a certain number of weeks long. So we're seeing variation there. I already made the point about where people are being hired into, and then, of course, they're paid. So it's not like an entry-level internship. Maybe you get university academic credit. These internships are paid. And if people want to talk to me afterward, I can talk to you about compensation later. But the Society of Women Engineers published a white paper on the success of the inaugural year of the task force. You can all take a look at it. I'll give you a link, a URL. It's Reentry with 2 E's, R-E-E-N-T-R-Y, reentry.swe.org, reentry.swe.org. If you go to that link, you'll see all the information about the STEM Reentry Task Force, and you'll be able to access this white paper. The other thing that we do at iRelaunch is that we track career reentry programs of all kinds, but we decided to make a special list only of the big corporate paid reentry internship programs. So we started it about 1.5 years ago, and we called it the 50+ list of paid corporate reentry internship programs around the world. Well, they grew so fast that now we call it the 60+ paid corporate reentry internship programs around the world, and we're getting into the high 60s now, so pretty soon we're going to have to make it to 70+. But the idea is that these programs are proliferating globally. This is just quickly, I continue to write for Harvard Business Review on the career reentry topic. If you want to check out some of these articles and I could talk to you about those after the session too. The other thing that we do at iRelaunch is we are the hub of exchange between all the companies across industry sectors that are running these programs. Companies that are thinking of running the programs, companies that might be in the initial stages of piloting them, and companies that have been running them for a while but want to always be tracking what the best practices are. So the first time we met, we had all the STEM Reentry Task Force companies talk. In June, we had several companies talk about critical issues in building these programs. And just a couple weeks ago at Columbia, we had our 21st conference. We had 600 people, another sellout crowd, and we had the special employer session, again, with these employer practitioners who are running programs at, this one was Moody's and Cummins and JP Morgan and Bank of America, talking about the critical issues in building these programs. We're also involved with Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In organization. We helped that Lean In create Lean In Return to Work, which is a chapter where people can connect through this platform in designated geographic areas and form job search, accountability, and goal-setting groups. So groups of relaunchers can get together through Lean In Return to Work. And we have uploaded 6 sessions of free Return to Work strategy curriculum that people can access. I asked the Lean In organization if I could connect to Lean In Korea when I was here, and they said they don't have organizers for Lean In Korea. So I also wanted to put the word out for that in case people are interested in creating the more broad Lean In Korea and also getting involved with Lean In Return to Work. Okay, so I want to wrap up and talk about why is this important now, and why is this important now, especially for Korea. So in 2008, there were 2 formal returnship programs, and they're actually both called Returnship. The Goldman Sachs Returnship program, and then Sara Lee had Returnships at Sara Lee at the time. Sara Lee has since been completely restructured and doesn't even exist as Sara Lee anymore, and so that program went away, but the Goldman program endured. But almost 10 years ago, in the US, there were 2 returnship programs. Now, of course, there are 67 programs globally. And then this is my 3rd time speaking in Korea. It's my first time here at this conference, but my 3rd time in Korea. My very first time speaking in Korea was in 2008. And I remember after I spoke for a week in different locations and had the opportunity to speak to employers and individuals and academics and people in the media. And I felt that Korea was running maybe 35 years behind the US in terms of their embrace of this whole concept of, can women return to work after career breaks? What does that actually look like when they get into companies? So I was here again in 2014, and now I'm here in 2017. And now I think the gap has narrowed. And I think Korea is about 10 years behind the US now in terms of the thinking of integrating women back into the workforce. I know that it's become a national economic imperative that has to do with fulfilling part of the labor shortage. But even beyond that, I'm just thinking in terms of the conversations I'm having now are very different from the conversations I was having 10 years ago. So guess how many corporate returnship programs there are in Korea right now? Anyone want to guess? There are 2. There are 2, just like there were in the US 10 years ago. There are 2 now in Korea. There's the Starbucks program, and this is bringing mothers back into barista or assistant manager or manager roles in the local retail organizations there. And SAP also piloted its Back to Work program. This is the SAP Back to Work program here in Korea before they expanded it to Japan and Australia. And so I am encouraged by the fact that we're seeing 2 programs, and that's where the US started 10 years ago. And I'm expecting to come back in the next 10 years and all of a sudden see a lot of programs at the biggest companies, at a Samsung, at an LG. But let's talk about challenges, and let's talk about them really frankly. So first of all, returning women who are experienced, who are educated, cannot return to menial tasks. They need to follow the lead of these global companies and have them return to substantive roles. We have to rethink what an internship is and distinguish the entry-level internship from the mid-career professional internship, and have companies think about running side-by-side programs, entry-level and mid-career professional programs. A very specific issue here in Korea. Age hierarchy rigidities. When I went back to work at Bain Capital, I was 42 years old. I was working for a 37-year-old. I had a 37-year-old boss. He had a 35-year-old boss. Here in Korea, I am told that would be very uncomfortable. And so there has to be some rethinking about what does it look like when someone's 42 years old and is coming back from an 11-year career break? Do they need to have a dotted line relationship to someone in the organization who is older than they are, even though in reality they're reporting to someone who's younger? That has to be thought through a little bit, and I think there has to be a leap there. The woman being responsible for the academic achievement of the child. So women have told me who are here in Korea that they feel pressure from their parents, from their in-laws, even from their spouse, that they need to stay home and be responsible for the academic achievement of their child, and if they're not, they're somehow shortchanging that child. And so I think that we need to have more examples of women who are working and who are mothers, and to see how their children are thriving. And also I am encouraged by younger men who seem to be more broad-minded in terms of what that relationship looks like in terms of responsibility for the kids. The other idea about when you leave the company, that somehow it's a betrayal. So I heard that when people leave to go to another company, it could be a betrayal. But if people leave to go on career break, to rethink that. It's not really a betrayal. It's something completely different. And then remember, these women are high caliber, and they really can be a source of talent that once companies discover it, they're going to really want to involve more and more of these women. And that the government may need to take the lead in terms of organizing programs for small and medium-sized companies, even if the big companies run their own programs. So I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm happy to stick around for questions. Thank you very much.